Captain Bill Martin, United States Army, Vietnam. I interviewed Bill Martin. It was January 23rd, 2006, right here in Grand Junction, Colorado. Bill was a captain in the Army, like I said. He flew Huey helicopters, one of my Huey helicopter pilots, and he was a captain. He served in Vietnam 1970-71, was part of Lam Song 719. And Bill was with A Company of the 101st Aviation Battalion, which was the 101st Airborne, and he was the 499th Transportation Detachment Commander. So Bill did a lot. Through his eyes and ears, folks, we're going to get another real glimpse into what it was like to be in Vietnam at such a young age. All these Vietnam veterans I've interviewed, and many of them are gone. I go to my local cemetery here at the Veterans Cemetery, and I'd say 80% of the burials now are Vietnam veterans. So, folks, it's urgent that we get their stories told. So, I want to thank Harry Marshall. Harry's supported some of my stories here. Harry, God bless you, sir. Thank you for your support of my work over the months and seeing the value and the importance of these stories. Folks, contained within these stories is why we have the freedoms we still have today. Although I think a lot of Americans have let go of their freedoms over the last 3 years, overall we're still a free country, although there probably are other parts of the world that are freer than we are. So we're fighting for the same freedoms today in our own country as our veterans fought for on foreign soil. So these stories are so important. So Harry, thank you, thank you, thank you. God bless you. And folks, if you'd like to become a part of this documentary series, this YouTube video channel, Voices of History, and my radio channel, Voices of History, I would invite you to donate to my work. There's information in the comment section of all of my videos. You just go to the comments and you'll see a link about donating to this work. It'll be greatly appreciated. Like I said, I don't sell commercials on this station. I don't believe in that. I think it's distracting and it's disrespectful, especially to our veterans. So I would encourage you to become a part of my work, would you? If you'd like to sponsor a story like Harry has done several times, there's information in the video description, which is underneath the video, or on my website. You can go to larrycapetto.com. At the top of the page, there's a link that says Sponsor a Vet. Click on that. There's where you'll see a full page of veterans that I've interviewed. You can see their pictures and their names and what war they fought in. Just include that in the sponsorship and I'll get it on the air and I'll mention you and thank you for doing it. So my heart's full, folks. Memorial Day has come and gone again. It's so difficult for me. I've lost so many veterans, but the encouragement is to continue sharing these stories with you and those across the world. I got people from Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Germany, France, Italy, Mexico, Canada, and all the other countries that I forgot to mention. And it's so wonderful to know that these stories are reaching you. So history is best learned from those who were there. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for watching and subscribing. And I'll talk to you again. Bill, 101st Airborne.
Mm-hmm.
What was your rank in your MOS at the time in Vietnam?
Well, when I went to Vietnam, I was a captain. I'd finished the test pilot course, and I was assigned to A Company 101st Aviation Battalion. 101st Airborne Division as the 499th Transportation Corps Maintenance Detachment Commander.
Okay. What years did you serve in Vietnam?
November 1970 to November 1971.
Okay, okay. We'll probably talk, like I said, about 45 minutes, but I'm just really intrigued with the role helicopters played in Vietnam, as I am of the role that the Higgins boats and the landing crafts played in World War II to transport troops in and out, the wounded and all that. Can you just take me to Vietnam, when you arrived, what your thoughts were, where you were, and was this your first time in combat?
I arrived at Ben Hoa Air Force Base in November 18th, 1970, and we were taken to a large hangar where the aviators and the medical people were separated from everyone else, and we were put on a C-130 going to Quang Tri within the hour. And we landed in Quang Tri. The maintenance, or the medical people went to the 84th Evac in Quang Tri, and the aviators went to the 101st Airborne.
Were you a pilot at this time?
I was a pilot, yes.
Okay, were you, I'm sorry, what year were you over there again?
November 70,
Okay.
November 71.
So, how did you feel about being in Vietnam? I mean, you probably heard a lot about what was going on before you went there. Was it what you expected it to be, or what was your first impression?
It was exactly what I expected it to be. I'd talked to a lot of people who'd gone over, and we're helicopter pilots going through as instructors when we were going through as student pilots at Fort Rucker, Alabama. And we knew that we were going to Vietnam after flight school, so the biggest topic of conversation was what Vietnam was like. And it was exactly as I expected it.
Good or bad?
It was as bad as I thought it would be. We were rocketed on the second day we were in Quang Tri. 4 people in the mess hall were killed. And we were probed that night with sappers. They blew up 3 aircraft, and I hadn't been in country 2 days.
How old are you now, sir?
I am 58 years old.
Okay, so you were...
I was 22.
Okay, now, was this your first time around combat? Or
Yes, it was.
Okay. And what kind of helicopters did you fly?
I flew UH-1 Iroquois Hueys, and I'm qualified in the OH-6, the Hughes 500, and the OH-58 Kiowa, and the H-1G Cobra.
Now, were those all used at the time you were in
Yes,
Vietnam?
yes, and I flew all of those in Vietnam.
Okay. What type of missions were you flying with the Huey? What were you doing?
We were flying resupply and combat assault and interdiction missions where we would have U.S. or South Vietnamese Hawk Bow, the Rangers, and we would fly if they had movement on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and they wanted us to air assault in, we would air assault U.S. infantry or the South Vietnamese Rangers.
Can you take me for a ride on the Huey with an assault landing into an LZ from the time you get on? Who's on the gunship, and then going in and landing, and what type of landing it was?
Typical combat assault would involve 10 UH-1 Huey transport helicopters and 4 H-1G Cobra gunships. You'd have a flight leader, you'd have a flight of 10, you would have a chase recovery, and this is all inclusive in the 10 aircraft. The flight leader would control the flight and direct the flight to battle speed, which would usually be 110 knots, your landing speed, which would really usually be 80 knots. He would tell you the number of seconds of separation in the combat assault, which was usually 10-second separation in between aircraft. When we would take off from the Camaraderie hideout at Camp Eagle, we would go and pick up our passengers, either Vietnamese or U.S. infantry, at either the brigade headquarters or at the South Vietnamese compound. We'd take them to a location in I Corps near the DMZ, and we would have the LZ would be spotted and prepped either by artillery or by our organic gunships with us. And then the flight leader would separate the aircraft, set up the landing pattern, and we would either go in as a full flight of 10 or 3-ship or 4-ship, whatever the landing zone could handle in the way of the main rotor of the Hueys. The main rotor disc of the Huey is 44 feet, and you have to have 10 or 15 feet on each side of that to really make a safe landing. But if it was in a rice paddy, you could land a 10-ship combat assault altogether. On a ridge line or a mountaintop, might be single ship or up to 3 ships at a time. And then once the approach was initiated, the flight leader would drop down, and the flight leader, once he was up, would brake to the left, the next aircraft would brake to the right, alternately braking to the right or left, giving cover fire for the other aircraft coming in. Then we would marry up. Usually the flight leader would loiter about 2 miles away, would marry up and then go back to Camp Eagle as a flight. The gunships would prepare the LZ by firing rockets and flechettes at the LZ and softening up any target or see if they could draw fire. If they drew fire, we could call in fast movers, F-4 Phantoms or F-4s, let's see, some of the Sky Raiders, to come in and either drop bombs or machine gun the area.
Okay. Hold on just one second here. Just a hair. Is it noisy when you're going in, or you got your ear headsets on, you don't hear much? 10 helicopters, that'd be pretty loud.
Wearing the APH-4 Army helmet, you can tighten it up where it does cut down the noise, but the noise is coming through your earphones. You've got 10 aircraft talking ship to ship. You've got a UHF radio that you're talking to division artillery, and you've got a VHF radio that you're talking to the jets and the fast movers. And it's an orchestrated chaos that once you lift off from the LZ, there's total silence. Then you'd turn on AFVN and listen to the doors as you're going back to Camp Eagle.
So that brings me into an interesting question. When you're flying into battle, I asked Mike, are you listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival? You're listening to music.
Yes, you are.
When you said the doors, you're talking about the group.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's, what song? Do you remember any songs?
The favorite one, The Animals, We Have to Get Out of This Place. We just listened to Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, the Supremes, anything of the 70 era that was popular. They played on AFVN and we listened to it.
So do those songs bring back all the memories these days when you hear them?
They certainly do. Yeah, they certainly do. And when we'd get together, a lot of times we would sing, We Have to Get Out of This Place.
And that was done by the Animals?
That was.
Eric Burton and the Animals?
Yeah, and that kind of our theme song.
I'll have to remember that one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Now, when you were flying the Hueys or you doing the assault landings, was it your first mission, then you did a second one and a third one, or had you done any combat before this?
If you were assigned to a resupply flight where you would go out and resupply fire support bases or A-teams, special forces camps, long-range reconnaissance patrolling, you would take out your supplies, make radio contact with them, have them pop smoke if they were not in a fixed area like a fire support base, and then you'd identify the smoke so that you weren't landing to an enemy smoke grenade. Then you would verify the smoke over the radio, you would land, drop off the supplies, take out their wounded. We called it ash and trash. Their whatever debris and trash they wanted taken out or wounded, we would take back to Camp Eagle and take to their brigade headquarters or their battalion area of operation.
Now, what was the designation? You said ash and trash. What did that represent?
Broken radios, batteries, any weapon that wouldn't work, anything that you did not want to leave in the jungle.
Okay.
And wounded, outgoing mail, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And on a combat assault, you might do 2 or 3 in one day. You might do 1 in a day. When we flew into Laos, we had our first crank at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we shut down at 11 o'clock that night. And we airlifted 7 trips into Laos with South Vietnamese infantry to the different fire bases, Fire Base Lola, Fire Base Lolita. All of the fire bases in Laos had L names.
Did you go into many hot LZs, or were they all pretty quiet when you went into them? Or did you go and you had your share of hot LZs?
50-50.
Yeah.
About 50% there was someone there, 50% there wasn't.
Did you know if it was going to be hot, or did it just happen at the time? Do you have any heads up as far as...
The intelligence was very poor. you knew you were going into an LZ, and if you knew the general area, near the Ashaw Valley, it was always hot. Near the coast, near Quang Tri, it was always just a walk in the park. It was never hot.
So going into a hot LZ, you've got Army troops on board, I'm assuming, and some of these kids are probably the first time in combat. I mean, are you hearing anything? Are you seeing their faces? Do they look scared? Do they look invincible? I mean, how are they? What's the mood of these?
I think it's a whole myriad of things. It went from just stark terror to the quiet, resolute that they are going to go and do it. And as we're coming into the LZ, the blues, the infantry, would climb out of the helicopter and get on the skids. And as we were coming in, if it was a touchdown, we would tell them that we were going to touch down, put the skids on the ground, and they would jump then. If it was in elephant grass, we would come to about a 3-foot hover and they would jump off. Sometimes the elephant grass was 10 and 12 foot deep. A lot of times they would just totally disappear. And then it's really confusing for them to link up with the other aircraft, the other packs, people on the other combat assault aircraft.
Was there any time where you're coming in formation and they start shooting at you and there's chaos and who lands first? I mean, does everything go out the window at a time like that, or is there order all the time?
It's organized chaos. If you are taking fire and if you are hit, you attempt to land in the LZ. That's where your protection is. That's where the infantry is. That's where your buddies are going to pick you up, and you try and stick your aircraft into the LZ. If you crash outside the LZ, they unpin guns and do a John Wayne, do a run for the LZ, and you attempt to stay with the other people.
Was there a particular mission that maybe it was worse, where you were shot up or crippled or crashed or anything like that happened when you're going in?
In February 18th, 1971, we had been in Laos for 10 days, and I was shot down at around 9:30 in the morning, and the aircraft was destroyed. My crew was fine, and then I went back to Quezon. They gave us another aircraft, and I went to fly with Alpha Troop 2nd of the 17th Cav guns, and I flew a Cobra on 2 missions, and when I came back, my complete crew had been killed in another aircraft crash. They were shot down north of the Ashaw Valley on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they were killed around 12:30. And then I was I was flight leader for a flight of 10, and I was shot down again at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Tell me what it's like to be shot down. I mean, seriously, by the time you're manning the controls, what type of rounds are hitting the ship, and then tell me about your dive to the ground or what happened.
When you're taking fire, you can see tracers go by. When you're taking hits, it sounds like a ice pick going through a beer can, because the Hueys are very thin-skinned aluminum, and a lot of times the outer skin will take a bullet and then it'll hit something hard, transmission mount or a hydraulic cylinder, something like that. So you get a tink-wop, or tink-tink. That's one that's coming in and going out. And once you're hit and you lose control, and you're attempting to fly the airplane, and you've lost all control, but your mind hasn't convinced yourself that you cannot fly it, so you attempt to right the aircraft, or you attempt to get the nose straight, that sort of thing, and then all of a sudden it's brown, blue, brown as you're flipping. We flipped 4 times, and it came to rest on the skids.
You flipping like this in the air?
Sideways, rolled it 4 times, and then landed on the skids, and when I unstrapped, I was flying left seat. I stood up and walked out of the helicopter. There was no nose. The door was gone. It was trashed UH-1.
You survived 2 crashes
on the same day.
Are you a praying man? I mean, how did you feel about God back then? I mean, were you praying?
Sure.
Was anybody killed or wounded during either crash on your ship?
Yeah. The first time I didn't lose anyone. Second time I lost 2 people. So.
Friends of yours? Crew
members? Sure. Yeah. A crew chief and a co-pilot. And in a small unit, you become brothers.
Well, tell me a little about the camaraderie of the other soldiers, the guys you're with. I mean,
Well, once you get into a unit and you live, drink, sleep, fly with these guys, it takes no time to know them, for them to know you, for them to accept you, to fly with you. And the majority of the helicopter pilots in Alpha 101 were 21 years or under. And a lot of 19-year-old motorcycle rider warrant officers that showed no fear. They would just fly. I mean, they were fearless, and they would go wherever they could. And if you didn't take any fire or hits, you were a candy ass. And if you took a lot of fire, took a lot of hits, you were a magnet ass. So you couldn't please them. But once a ship, a combat assault was over, everyone would get around and go through the mission, give people hugs, that sort of thing.
You lost friends. I mean, at the time, were you very aware of what was happening, or was it a thing that happened afterwards where it hit you like, I just lost my best friend, or I just lost some of my, I mean, or at the time, are you so focused on your mission that you don't really think about it?
At the time, you try and put it aside. You try and forget about it. You try and continue on with what you're doing. And you try and find some reason that person died. Well, maybe he was too high coming in the LZ, or maybe he oversped his engine, or maybe he did something wrong. You're trying to find a reason that he was killed and you lived.
Did you ever suffer with guilt having survived? I know some of those
Yes.
guys.
Mm-hmm.
Explain what that's like.
Well, with me, the Army was quite a bit of security for 20 years. And in the Army, you couldn't really show remorse or that the combat really bothered you. You couldn't do that. And if, Lord help you, if you ask for help when you were in the military, they would find some way to really get you out of the military. It was just not acceptable for a warrior to think that he had a problem with his friends dying. And it wasn't until after I was out of the Army and retired and I saw the movie Platoon. And it's where the one sergeant was left behind as the helicopters were flying away, really brought back a lot of bad feelings and a lot of thoughts that I'd put away for 20 years. But.
Now, was there a particular incident during the time you were flying there that maybe was more difficult than another, and what was that? Maybe being shot down is it. I mean, I don't know what could be worse, but...
I think it's being shot down and just really not knowing what the next day is going to bring, or that afternoon. And we were flying against radar-controlled 37 millimeters and quad 50s, and Lamson 719 was the helicopter invasion of Laos, and they lost several hundred aircraft. They lost 2,100 American pilots and crew and infantry, and we were in there for about 3 weeks.
Do you mind me asking you? I mean, I think I kind of caught you on the spot, but as far as, you know, I've asked a lot of the World War II guys who saw many of their friends and people die, and as a civilian talking to somebody who's been in combat, and I know my faith in God, but I mean, did you find yourself praying prayers before you went on a mission, or before,
certainly.
During, after? I mean,
certainly.
Tell me what you did, or what.
No, you do it as a group. I think there are no atheists in foxholes. So, and I had a strong faith before I went in the military. I still do. But it's just one of those things that your events overtake themselves. And I think the good Lord does protect people, but a lot of times the events just overtake themselves, and you either make it through or you don't.
Is there a biblical perspective to war that you have as a philosophy when you're in combat, or is it just, that's the bad guy, we're supposed to kill him? And
well, I think King David, when when he would go into battle, he would have his staff, and he would have the Ark of the Covenant with him, the battle Ark of the Covenant. And those were different times, but I do believe God intervened and did not let them lose battles. And I think he does help, and you know, it just we would pray as a group, would pray individually.
What about the wounded? Were you used as a transport for the wounded?
Yes.
Explain to me, if you're hovering, if you're on the ground, and how they're putting the wounded or the dead in, and what you're seeing.
If we would come in as a Medevac to evac wounded, they would come to the helicopter and put them on the helicopter. We had morphine on the helicopters, and we had bandages, tourniquets, and that sort of thing. The crew chief and the gunner were trained very haphazard. They would go over to the first aid station. They would get an hour class on how to put on a tourniquet and how to administer morphine and how to put the number of morphine caps that they had taken, either bend them in their pocket or on their belt, or put the used syrettes on the individual so that the medics, when they got to the hospital, would know how many they had. Then we would fly them to 85th Evac at Phu-Bai, which was a MASH surgical hospital. And from the time we would pick a wounded up, a wounded individual, it would be no more than 15 minutes. And we could have him at 85th Evac. And they could have him in surgery within another 15 minutes, depending on the number of casualties that were brought in. And they had a triage outside the tents that would take the more severe wounded and those that needed immediate attention, and sort them outside and take them in.
As a pilot, I mean, is it something you detach yourself from? I mean, you know, the wounded or the dead in the aircraft. I mean, you find yourself looking over your shoulder, or you just hurry up, let's get on and let's get out of here, and you're going to get them out of there? Is that...
No, you really attempt to talk to the crew chief and see what their condition is, and what how severe is it, and you know, is he going to make it? How bad is the wound? Is he conscious? Is he lethargic? A really severely wounded guy will just stare off in space. The ones that are lightly wounded will scream and thrash around, and sometimes their screams are good things because they aren't severely wounded.
How about the dead? Did you transport dead?
We did. We carried body bags, and we would bag and tag them if they were not already. And a lot of times when you'd go in to pick up dead soldiers, they would already be in a body bag and be tagged. And then we would take them also to 85th Evac, and then they would go to the 101st Graves Registration there.
Did you see a lot of that type of thing when you were there, or just maybe...
The first 4 months, that's about all I did. And yeah, every day. We flew on a mission to recover the pilots of 2 Cobra helicopters that crashed. They had crashed about 7 days prior to us getting there, and the bodies were bloated and they stuck to the ground. We had to put the bags over them and then kind of roll the bag and them together, and they were stuck to the dirt in very, very putrid smell. And we were able to get all 4 of the pilots out and get their dog tags and get those remains identified.
That was your job?
Yes.
How did you I mean, why would that be your job as a pilot? I would think somebody else would do that.
Well, we were told to fly in and get them. Mm-hmm. And they had hit the side of the rock pile north of Dong Ha along the Key River.
Mm-hmm. Is there any glory or glamour in a formation of Hueys going into a landing zone with the doors playing or the animals playing? Is there any... Are you thinking of, I'm fighting for God and country, I'm fighting for the freedom for our country, or are you just, it's a survival?
I think it's a survival, but you're fighting for the guy next to you. You're fighting for the other aircraft. You want to be aware, and you want to be able to return fire to protect the formation, the other ships. You want to be able to provide as much firepower as you can. But to think that we were doing something for the United States or our country was the furthest thing from our mind. We were required to go, we were ordered to go, and we went.
And were you drafted?
I was drafted.
Okay.
I was drafted in October of '66, but then I went to officer candidate school. I was a 19-year-old second lieutenant. I was a 21-year-old captain. I commanded the 499th in Vietnam. I commanded E Company, 705th Maintenance Battalion at Fort Carson when I was 19 years old.
Wow.
I couldn't drink with my guys, but I could give them an Article 15. But I was the old man. I was 19 and had 160 people in my company. My first sergeant was 42, and his youngest child was 22. So, but
Tell me about the drug usage in Vietnam. You hear things. Was it there? I mean, how did it affect the combat and all that?
in a helicopter unit, really you had drinkers and you had heads. You had those that would drink and you had those that would smoke pot and use heroin. And those were the only two drugs we really had there. And the heroin use was not tolerated in the flight crew. Some of the crew chiefs smoked pot, and they were shunned. But all of the pilots and crew chiefs and gunners really drank. And when you got down from a mission and you were still alive, you went to the different clubs. We had an officers club, an NCO club, and an enlisted club. And they would go and drink. Or you'd stand in a circle when you got down and someone would open a bottle or get a case of beer and just start passing it around. But a lot of drinking. And I did not see a person smoke a marijuana cigarette or inject heroin in the year I was there. Now they would do it because you'd find the capsules for the heroin in the company area. The users would go ahead and inject it and then throw the empty the capsule that the heroin came in, as a thumbing their nose at the company commander that they were doing it and they weren't getting caught.
Was it just a sign of the times? I mean, as far as what's happening in the States and it carrying over into Vietnam? I mean, is that basically what it, or was the stress so bad that they had to escape it? I mean...
I think the people who used drugs over there had a harder time readjusting when they came back to the United States, when they came back to what we call the world. When they left Vietnam and came back, they had a harder time adjusting. They had a lot of misconception and a perception of what went on there that was warped, was confused by the drug use. And even though alcohol is a drug, they would sober up, you know. And then they were able to sort through what was real and what was not.
Mm-hmm. Well, you hear stories of a lot of guys that came back messed up, and you wonder if it was the stress, the drugs, or a combination, or just shell-shocked. I mean, you know, so you don't really know. But everybody seems to know somebody that was from Vietnam, and they're messed up. Well, they're
yes.
not all messed up, but some of them are.
Yeah, they really are. And a lot of the veterans have a very severe case of post-traumatic stress. And I don't care what you call it now. In the Civil War, it was called the soldier's melancholy. And it's PTSD. It's the images that they've seen, the things that they've gone through, the sights and sounds that they've heard, and they associate those sounds with what happened in Vietnam. Loud noises, jumpy. They're very aware of what's going on around them. And at a parade, when the old Jeeps come through, the World War II guys look at the Jeeps. And then the Vietnam guys, if a Medevac helicopter from St. Mary's flies over, the old Vietnam vets are looking up to the sky. And the helicopter, it was a helicopter war. The helicopter brought in food, mail, hauled out wounded, hauled you to R&R. It was the mode of transportation around Vietnam. And the helicopter brought good things and bad things. It took the infantry to LZs in the middle of the jungle they didn't want to go to. But it would pick them up and take them back to a secure area for a stand down or a battalion headquarters or a trip on R&R.
You remember in '65 when President Johnson ordered the air cav to Vietnam, or do you have recollection of that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
And were you wanting to be a part of that at that? I mean, what were you thinking about? Was it something, I'm going to do that someday, or?
No, I was going to Mesa State, and I wasn't setting any academic records. I was 18, and I really ended up on academic probation. And I did not get drafted. A friend of mine, Rod Core, got drafted, and I volunteered for the draft to go 6 weeks early. But at that time, Vietnam was really hanging over us like a black cloud. All of our friends were there. You saw it on the news every night. The newspaper was filled with stories of Vietnam and pictures of wounded soldiers and soldiers in battle. And it was a thing that Rod and I knew we were both going to go to, just because of our age and the amount of people that were going to Vietnam. And it just was kind of a relief when I was drafted, because I knew the waiting was over.
I'm very intrigued by your story and what you're telling me here. And I have so many thoughts and questions, but you know, I've never been in combat, so but you can kind of get a feel for what it could have been like. And as far as you're a pilot, and what do you think the troops are thinking about the helicopters? I mean, I've heard them say, "Oh, they're saviors that, you know, coming to help," or they brought good things, like you said too. So, did you have much interaction with any of the troops going in and out of the landing zones? I mean, either verbal, or I mean, could you encourage them, or what kind of what was going on?
We had a lot of downtime with the U.S. infantry. We would pick up 60 people on a 10-ship combat assault. And if the LZ wasn't prepped, we would land beside ML1, the main supply route going from Da Nang to Quang Tri. We'd just land beside the road and wait until either the jets or division artillery, the New Jersey, prepped the area, prepped the LZ. And we might be on the ground for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we'd stand around and talk and see where they were from, heat up coffee on C ration cans full of JP4, and just interacted with a lot of the infantry. They were called grunts in Vietnam, and that was the sound they made when they jumped out of the helicopter with a rucksack on their back. And they were from every state in the Union, every type of civilian occupation. It was truly a cross-section of America. We had attorneys carrying rifles as a private. We had carpenters, electricians, policemen. We had firefighters. We had drug dealers, car thieves, which sometimes came in handy if you needed a Jeep. But you had a complete cross-section. And the draft really gave us a complete cross-section of America. But you get to talk to them, get to be friends. We would fly them down to Da Nang when they would call and request flights, and we became pretty close. We flew with the 3rd Brigade mostly of the 101st.
When you're coming in to a landing zone, what are you manning as far as a pilot, as far as shooting? What do you have at your disposal?
Well, in a Huey, you are just flying the aircraft, and the crew chief and the gunner maintain suppressive fire. If you're in flight lead and there is no one in the LZ, it's a virgin LZ, you're dropping people off for the first time, your door gunners on the first 3 or 4 aircraft in a 10-ship combat assault will really hose the area down. They'll go through 2,000 rounds of 7.62 per M60, and there's 2 M60s, one on each side. So they'll expend 4,000 rounds when you're short final in probably a minute and a half. And once you land and put American people out, then the chalks 4 through 10 will suppress around the LZ, but they will try and stay 50, 60 meters away from the LZ. But they'll be shooting at tree lines and bushes, brushes, boulders, anything like that.
Tell me a little bit about the enemy, the tactics, the weapons, and did you encounter them yourselves? Just tell me a little bit about the enemy.
In I Corps where we were, it was all North Vietnamese, and they wore uniforms. It wasn't the black pajama Viet Cong. It was North Vietnamese in pith helmets with red stars on their helmets. They would hide if they could. They would shoot at you any way they could. They booby-trapped ridge lines with 500-pound bombs that we sent them. And that's what got me knocked down on the 18th of February. We were overflying a 500-pound bomb that we had sent them. They detonated it, and it blew the tail boom off of the Huey, and we went inverted and crashed on a ridge line. They were well disciplined. They were, and there was a lot of them. They were well disciplined, and there were several divisions of North Vietnamese in Laos when we were in Laos.
Could you visually see anything when you were firing? I mean, could you see people running or vehicles? Or
Oh yes, yeah. You could see elephants. We killed elephants, and you could see people. You're 800, 900 meters away, or less. And in hovering in elephant grass, a lot of times the elephant grass would part, and there would be a North Vietnamese pointing a AK-47 or an SKS at you, and the door gunners would be standing on the skids, ready to engage, and they would. When we landed in one LZ, there were probably 70 dead North Vietnamese stacked around the LZ, and they had tried to overrun Firebase Lola, which they did overrun the next day, but the defenders had killed probably 600, 700 North Vietnamese.
when you're flying in, are you banking? Are you, what's it called? Are you doing this stuff and then going in and out and all these things you see?
You really don't. You don't jink going in. You maintain course, you maintain battle speed, you maintain separation, and if you're taking fire and taking hits, you just take it. Once you leave the LZ, a favorite trick of the helicopter pilots was to kick in a pedal to where it looked like they were turning right or left. The helicopter nose would be turned 30 degrees away from your direction of flight. So they would try and shoot in front of you, but you weren't going to the right, you were just going straight. But your aircraft nose was canted to the right. Nap of the earth, as low as you could get it, as fast as you could get it, was the safest place to be. 3, 4, 5 foot off the trees, 110, 120 knots. And then maintain 10-second separation from your other aircraft that are in your flight.
Did you see any helicopters being shot down at any of your missions, and you're looking over, there goes one, there goes one? I mean, what are you seeing? What are you thinking when you see that? I mean, what's happening?
You're trying to concentrate on what you've got to do. If you're trying to land on a ridgeline and you've got people in your flight taking fire and taking hits and going down, chase recovery, it's his job to come in with his people and pick up survivors and attempt to get the aircraft destroyed if it is in an area that they will not try and get it out with a CH-47, but to pick up the crew or crews. And then once the LZ has been secured or the people have been dropped at the LZ, then the flight leader would direct the remainder of the flight or people to come down and pick up the crews that have been shot down.
Mm-hmm. Organized chaos.
Total chaos, yeah. And we were flying a 10-ship combat assault, and I was flying Chalk 4, and I ended up being flight leader. And only 4 of the 10 aircraft were flyable enough to get back to Quezon. And I had 12 people on my aircraft besides my crew of 4. We stripped the insulation off of the ceiling, we jettisoned the doors, we threw guns overboard, we threw helmets overboard, boots, clothes. They ripped all of the radios except an FM radio that I was using to talk to Quezon. My turbine outlet temperature was 1400 and 730s hot. And it'll melt down at 1600. And I had governor emergency, which controls the engine, and I was pulling the trigger to add more starting fuel to the engine, which made it hotter, but had to have the power to fly. And we're in the compressor stalls, and the aircraft was yawing and pitching and bucking, bucking and snorting. We were able to get back to Quezon and land it. And as the skids touched the ground, the transmission ratcheted to a stop. The engine was toast. It was over-temped, over-torqued, over-sped, and that was around 11 o'clock in the morning. We saw the flight surgeon at 12, and we were back in a new Huey at 1:30 in the fray going on combat assaults.
Can you tell me what type of communications are going on? I mean, what are you saying? Red Leader 1, this is Red Leader 2. I mean, what are you saying to each other?
Well, you have a call sign. My call sign was Knob Dicker 6. 6 is the designated commander, and Knob Dicker is maintenance officer, dicks with knobs. The Comancheros had call signs of 436. Dirty 2 Dozen was a friend of mine. He was Comachero 24. But in the flight, you are chalk.
Okay here. Okay. I may have to change to this battery, but I want to ask about something else before we run out of time here. But I see the picture of the Vietnam Wall up here. Have you seen that in
Yes,
Washington?
I have. I went there one time.
What was your thoughts and feelings, and were you looking for names? Tell me about that experience.
Just totally overcome. The Vietnam War Memorial is set up on the date the people were killed. And so February 18th, when I lost my crew, they're all there. It's missions where you would have multiple deaths out of the flight. It's on that date. And it's just overwhelming. Beautiful memorial.
Yeah. What triggers the memories today? I mean, we talked about music, but when we first started the interview, the helicopter was flying over. I mean, do you find yourself reminiscing or thinking back or flashing back? Or, I mean, what triggers that?
A lot of things. Music, people saying something, dates, days that you had a bad day. Friends will call. They'll just, well, do you remember such and such? Well, yeah, I do. And just different things, very stimuli of every shape, sound, name, songs, movies. We Were Soldiers Once brings back a lot of memories. And Platoon. Apocalypse Now didn't do anything for me, but some of the newer movies are, and watching a Huey come over, which, you stand and watch. So.
Tell me, I lost my thought there. Well, I know because we started, I heard the helicopter come over, and I thought, you probably, I don't know if you heard it, but we were listening to that. But tell me about the homecoming that the Vietnam vets didn't receive. I mean, what was the whole homecoming thing about, and it being an unpopular war? What any memories you have of that?
We landed at McChord Air Force Base south of Seattle, and we went up to Seattle, and we had a hard time getting a taxi cab driver to pick us up. And Fort Lewis, Washington is right there. It's a military base, and once we got to the airport, everyone just really treated us like we were criminals or had a disease. And my car broke down on me when I was going back to Fort Carson. I was near Salida, Colorado, and I had left my wife, and I was going to hitchhike back to Salida, see if I could get a wrecker or someone to come look at it. And an elderly man and woman picked me up, and we were talking, and they asked me where I was from, and I told them Grand Junction, Colorado, and they said, well, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I was at Fort Carson. And they said, well, the war was terrible, and I agreed. And they said, well, were you drafted? And I said, well, I was, but I'm an officer now, and I'm staying in the Army for a little bit. And they immediately pulled over and asked me to get out of their vehicle. And February, about 30 degrees, 2 o'clock in the morning. And we were probably 15 miles from town. But they just did not want to have a... Now, if I would have been a drafted soldier serving under protest, I probably would have got the ride into town. But because I decided to stay in the Army, then I was not to be tolerated.
That's not fair, is it?
No. I don't think the Vietnam era veterans got an acceptance of the American people. The homecoming and the parades, I don't think that has much to do with it as more of an acceptance. Desert Storm. The veterans of Desert Storm were accepted because they did what an American is supposed to do. They go over there, they engage in the combat, they conquer the land, and they leave. And it was a 100-hour war. And the people the soldiers from Desert Storm were greeted totally different than the people from Vietnam. I think World War II, the veterans were welcomed home. The Korean War veterans were less welcome. And the Vietnam veterans were not welcome at all.
It's a shame.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody ever thanked you for your service in
Yes.
Vietnam? Okay. They called it an unpopular war. I mean, I don't understand that.
Yeah.
But that's what they called it.
A lot of rules to fight by. We had a fire for fire. If we were fired on, we could only return the fire that we received. If we received small arms, we could only shoot back small arms. If we received multiple bursts of a machine gun, we could return fire with a machine gun. Instead of fight to win, it was more of a blocking, a protection type thing, where the prize fighter is blinded and the other fighter is not. And
Sure.
it just wasn't popular with people fighting it, and it wasn't popular with the American people. And it was a dark time for America.
Bill, tell me about I asked all the World War II guys this as a veteran. What does freedom mean to you?
What freedom means to me? To vote, to breathe, to stay in one place if I like, or move if I like. When I was in Germany, they had to have permission from the mayors of the town that they were going to and the town they were leaving from to travel. America is free. It's about the only country in the world where we don't have to put our passport, our identification when we check into a motel, so it can be ran by the police department. Freedom to me is very precious.
What does the American flag mean to you?
Service, loyalty, honor.
You saw men that were wounded and killed. What would you say? What would you tell a young person, or just in general, about the price of freedom? What's the price for freedom?
Hardship from a lot of people. From the War of Revolution. When we first established this country, millions have died to protect it and to protect the freedoms we have.
Are you proud that you're a Vietnam veteran?
Yes.
Can you expound a little bit about that pride?
Well, I'm proud that I served in Vietnam. I'm proud I served my country. I'm proud I served with my friends. I did nothing I was ashamed to do.
Do you go to reunions, anything like that?
I don't.
Okay.
No.
Why do you think it's important that we remember about World War II, Korea, or Vietnam?
I think we can learn from all conflicts. I think we can learn from World War II. I think our military planners that work for civilian secretaries of defense and secretaries of the Army can learn from the underestimating of the Iraqis. I think we overestimated the military in Iraq, and we underestimated the insurgent or the civilian population over there that really hate Americans. And I feel that the military thought that once they conquered the military, they would have subdued the insurgency, but it had the opposite effect. When they subdued the military, that took away a lot of the control and a lot of the authority that was keeping the insurgency in check. And a lot of it is just Muslims that want to kill Americans, kill an infidel, and we need to address that. And I think we can learn from all of our wars.
What do you want to happen from this interview and this documentary? I mean, what do you want people to learn about Vietnam as far as what we're doing and recording these stories?
I think the hardship that the people went through and the hard times when they got back, mostly from the non-acceptance of what they were required to do and what they were ordered to do, and the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that the soldiers went through.
Is there any glamour or glory in combat?
No, there is none. There's honor, but that's different than glory.
That's good. Well, I want to make sure we got it all. You feel pretty good? Anything else you want to tell me? Because I picked your brain pretty good, but again, as you talk, I'm visualizing, I'm thinking, I'm just picturing what it would have been like. But I want to ask you to do one more thing that I ask all the veterans, if this is okay, from where you're sitting. When I tell you, can I ask you to give me a salute into the camera? When I tell you. Okay. Okay, Bill, right into the camera. Thank you, sir.